Existentialism is a Humanism by Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was born in Paris in 1905 and graduated in philosophy in 1929. He was then drafted into the French army in 1939 and became a prisoner of war in 1940 and was released 1 year later. He returned to France and began teaching again. He also became active in the Resistance, which was a French group dedicated to removing the occupying German army. During this time, in 1943, he released Being and Nothingness, his first book on phenomenology, the study of awareness. When the war ended, Sartre stopped teaching and became a playwright and a public intellectual who was very involved in some of the prominent political issues of post-war society. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1964 but refused it on the grounds that it would institutionalize writing. After his health slowly deteriorated, he died in 1980 when he was 74 years old. So why did Sartre write this book and what was its purpose? Well, firstly, the book, written in 1946, is actually based on a lecture that Sartre delivered in 1945 at Club Maintenant in Paris. The purpose of the lecture and the book is to offer a response to the common reproaches made against existentialism. The first of which is that it reduces man to the quietism of despair. The second, it denies the reality and seriousness of human affairs. Next, it overemphasizes the evil side of human life. And finally, it has no sense of morality. We will explore all of these reproaches against existentialism in more depth next, and along the way, we will be able to see why Sartre makes this link between existentialism and humanism. Before we look at some of the reproaches in depth, it will be useful to look at what these key terms actually mean. Although there are religious and atheistic forms of existentialism, Sartre finds that the key commonality between them is the idea that existence precedes essence. This means that man first of all exists, with no predetermined nature or purpose. He encounters himself in the world and has the freedom to choose and determine his nature and what shall become of him. He does this through his actions in the world, of which he is completely and utterly responsible for. Sartre summarizes: man first of all exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. Next, what is humanism, and more particularly, existential humanism? Sartre views it as the idea that human beings have the power to make freely willed choices to create their own values and determine who they will become. Humanism means that there is no reliance upon any supreme deity or a universal human nature to give us our value. Instead, we should derive human value as being self-created through the continuous undertaking of projects in the world. The first reproach made against existentialism is that it is a philosophy of quietism. Quietism is defined as a passive withdrawn attitude or policy toward the world or worldly affairs. Sartre gives us some examples of quietism in the book. The first is of the person who claims that circumstances have been against me. I was worthy to be something much better than I have been. As we can see here, they are blaming external factors for the unsuccessful character. Another example, I admit I have never had a great love or great friendship, but that is because I never met a man or woman who are worthy of it. Again, we see the use of blame of outside factors being used here. But existentialism is not an attitude of quietism because it defines man by his action. Hence, if man performs no action and lives as if he were the victim of circumstance, then he will be nothing. Nothing shall become of him. Not choosing is itself a choice, and by not choosing, you are defining yourself as a person of weakness and inaction. However, if man performs heroic actions, then he will become a heroic man and will form an image of man as one of greatness and of success. Man is nothing else but what he purposes. He exists only insofar as he realizes himself. He is nothing else but the sum of his actions, nothing else but what his life is. This immense responsibility of determining who we will become can cause what is called anguish in us. We can become overwhelmed at the significance of the task that faces us. We will explore this more next. The second reproach made against existentialism is that it denies the seriousness of human affairs. Sartre summarises the implications of this reproach here. For since we ignore the commandments of God and all values prescribed as eternal, nothing remains but what is strictly voluntary. Everyone can do what he likes. To understand Sartre's response to this criticism, we need to look at what is meant by the term responsibility. The idea stems from what we discussed earlier, that existence precedes essence, in that we are completely responsible for what we are and what we will become. Sartre goes on to say, thus, the first effect of existentialism is that it puts every man in possession of himself as he is, and places the entire responsibility for his existence upon his own shoulders. And when we say that man is responsible for himself, we do not mean that he is responsible only for his own individuality, but that he is responsible for all men. Let's explain the significance of this last point and how it is derived. To begin, Sartre says that to choose between this or that is at the same time to affirm the value of that which is chosen. Otherwise, why would we choose it? Next, through our actions we determine our values, and thus we create a certain image of man as we would have him to be. From this, we can say that in fashioning myself, I fashion man. This overwhelming responsibility is called anguish, and it is almost certain to be felt when choosing any certain path in life. However, one may try to deny this fact. Sartre responds to them. One ought to always ask oneself what would happen if everyone did as one is doing. Nor can one escape from that disturbing thought except by a kind of self-deception. The man who lies in self-excuse by saying everyone will not do it must be ill at ease in his conscience. By its very disguise, his anguish reveals itself. When you make a decision, you are saying this is how anyone ought to behave given these circumstances. But some hide and try to mask their anguish by claiming that not everyone will act as they are acting, so it is okay for them to do so. This very denial and deferral of responsibility is the very thing that reveals their own anguish. Here, we conclude that existentialism does not take the seriousness of human affairs lightly. The third criticism of the existentialists is their overemphasis on the evil side of human life. However, Sartre states that what people reproach us with is not, after all, our pessimism, but the sternness of our optimism. He follows that no doctrine is more optimistic for two main reasons. First, it confronts man with possibility of choice, and secondly, the destiny of man is placed within himself. The philosophy bases itself upon the fact that we are not victims of circumstance. Instead, we are the result of our choices. The final reproach is that existentialism has no sense of morality. It is clear that since existentialism has excluded God, there must be somebody to invent these moral values. Sartre uses the analogy of a painter and his painting to explore his view on morality. In a painting, we see that there are no aesthetic values a priori, but there are values which appear in due course in the coherence of the picture, the relation between the will to create and the finished work. This is telling us that just as there are no rules that an artist must follow to paint a good picture, there are no external rules that can be deduced to live a moral life. We can't define the rules before we are alive, we must create them and live them along the way. No one can tell what the painting of tomorrow will be like. One cannot judge a painting until it is done. Thus, we cannot judge a man until his time is up, and we can see the picture as a whole rather than just one part of it at one moment in time. Next, Sartre draws a link between the painting analogy and the creation of moral values. It is the same upon the plane of morality. There is this in common between art and morality, that in both we have to do with creation and invention. We cannot decide a priori what it is that should be done. Sartre also states that no rule of general morality can show you what you ought to do. This is because, ultimately, it is up to us what we choose to believe and how we interpret rules in life. And so, in choosing a particular ethical system, we have already decided the type of advice and laws that we will receive. We pretend that we have been given these rules by an external command, but it is always ourselves who have chosen to follow them. Man will always make his own choice. To conclude, Sartre writes, "To say that we invent values means nothing more nor less than this, that there is no sense in life a priori. Life is nothing until it is lived, but it is yours to make sense of, and the value of it is nothing else but the sense that you choose. It is therefore us that must invent our values and live them as best we can in our life, learning as we go." Thank you for watching, and please leave a like and subscribe. See you next time on Feeling Philosophical, and goodbye.